Hey everyone, I've been using Darktable all wrong, and this week I'm going to edit an image using the software and talk about why now I think I might just get it. So a little while ago now I made a video about using Darktable, link up top, and that video was kind of the first time I'd ever used the software, and it was really my first impressions of editing a raw image with it. And I got a good result out of it. Well, it was a result I was pleased with. But I've since learned, after putting that video out and getting comments and things like that, that I perhaps wasn't using it the correct way. Or, well, maybe correct's not the right word, but not the generally intended way or the recommended way. So after getting a lot of advice from people in the comments and also reading some of the Darktable manual, I've learned quite a lot, and I've been putting that into practice, and I wanted to make another video today where I'm going to be editing an image and talking about how I was using it before and how I'm using it now and how that's perhaps a better way of using it. I was recently at Rother Valley Country Park where they were hosting the Jet Ski Championships, and I took the Nikon D500 and Nikon 300mm PF lens as well as the Sigma 150 to 600mm lens. And yeah, it was a great day and I got some images I was really pleased with. So let's dive in and have a look at the image we're going to edit. Okay, so I'm not going to go through any of the user interface or anything like that today. I did that in the last video. We are already in the darkroom mode and this is the image we're going to edit. So this is not the best shot I got on the day, but it is quite an appropriate one to demonstrate all of the things that I want to talk about today. And in the last video we talked about modules and how Darktable uses modules to apply settings to your image, and that's the way that it edits it and you build it up. And what I didn't realise in the last one is the way it works is from the bottom upwards. So basically all of these at the bottom will pass on the information to the next one above it and the next one until we get to the top, and then this is where it will be output. So a number of modules have already been applied by default, and we are in a scene referred mode here. So without getting too technical, the processing in Darkroom can be set to non-display referred, which is kind of the old way that Darktable used to do it, filmic, which is the scene referred way that I used in the last video, and scene referred sigmoid. So it seems that sigmoid is now the default, and we'll talk a little bit more about filmic and sigmoid a little later in the video, but just to let you know that it is set to scene referred sigmoid. So the first thing that I want to talk about that I didn't really use in the preferred way last time is white balance. So I used this last time the way I would in Lightroom. So I went into here and I started playing around with the temperature and tint, and you would think that that being called white balance is the way you control the white balance in the image. However, that's not really the creative way of applying the settings for white balance within Darktable. This is more of a technical tool, so it's to try and achieve a technically perfect white or white balance in your image. So that can be really important in, say, portrait photography, maybe less important in something like landscape photography, where you might want to have less realistic colours. But essentially, all I'm doing with this is just setting it to D65. So you've got different options here, so you can have it set to user modified or detected from an area, as shot in camera, and I'm not 100% sure what these two variations are, but they're both D65, which is what we want. We want it on D65, but I think in this version of Darktable 5.2.1 we have also got this version, and you can't see that, that's just clipping off the edge of the screen recording there, but it says set white balance to as shot and later correct to camera reference point. In most cases it should be D65, and this one just says set white balance to camera reference point. In most cases it should be D65. So yeah, I'm not 100% sure what the difference is. If you do know, maybe put it down in the comments below, but I'm just going to leave it on this one for now. And basically this means that I can control the white balance using color calibration instead. So if we just open color calibration up, you'll see in here we have got a temperature slider, and yeah, it looks kind of like something that we might use for adjusting the white balance. We do have different ways of setting a white balance setting preset almost, I guess, called the illuminant here. So we can set it to as shot in camera, or we can set it to, say, daylight. You can also use the little color picker here. So if we do that, you see it's drawn a box here around the image, and it's using all of that area at the moment to kind of work out what the best white balance will be. But you can change that. So if you wanted to, say, just choose the white area down here with the water, it's now using that to set the white balance of the image. And you see it's changed to custom now next to illuminant. And you can adjust that further by adjusting the chroma or the hue if you like. I'm going to use the daylight setting, and then I can just adjust the temperature as well. So I'm just going to bump that up. It's quite a warm day, so I want it just bumped up to the warmer end quite a bit. Maybe to about there, I think that's alright. I'm not going to change anything else, so we can close that one up. Okay, so let's move on to the next module that we're going to adjust. You'll see the next one up in here at the moment is highlight reconstruction. That's one that's been applied automatically, and I'm not going to play around with that. Or demosaic. Orientation, that's on auto at the moment. We can rotate the image by just right clicking and drawing a line. So I think the water line actually comes down here like this. So I'm going to just do that. And we can just come across here into crop. So I'm in the next tab along, which are the base modules. And I'll just click crop. And I'm just going to bring down the edges of the image like that. Or edges of the area that's going to be cropped to. We'll just have the guy on a third line, maybe about there. Don't really want that blue boy in the background, I'm going to cut that out. Don't need too much at the top of the image. So I think around about that's okay. So we can just click the module to get out of that. Come back to the active modules. And let's see what we've got next then. Exposure, that's been set kind of automatically. We can just bump that up a little bit maybe. But we are going to play around with tone and contrast and things as we go along, so I'm not going to do too much with that at the minute. And the next thing I'm going to do then is I'm going to adjust the tone. So what I want is tone equalizer here. I'm going to click on that. And that's on advanced mode at the minute. We can put it on simple if we want it a little bit easier. And we can play around with some of these sliders here. So the ones at the top affect the more the shadow areas, and the ones at the bottom are the more the highlights. So that's not really doing much. Can maybe put that up a touch. I think it's going to start to affect the image more as I get down to these sliders down here. So see, that one's making quite a big difference. We'll really bump that one up just to get some detail back here in the jet ski rider. And then we're getting more into highlights. Not sure I want to do anything with the highlights, that's too blown out. Yeah, I'm just going to leave those. So that's all I'm going to do for now with the tone equalizer. And this is another point where I need to point out where I was doing it probably not in the best way last time. So in the last video I was using a module called shadows and highlights. And The manual for Darktable actually recommends that you don't use shadows and highlights. If you read the notes on the page for shadows and highlights module, it actually says this module performs blurs in LAB color space, which can result in a number of issues, including halos, high local contrast in highlights, and hue shifts towards blue in the shadows. Instead, use the tone equalizer module. So that's what I've done, and yeah, that's given us a lift in the shadows there, and we're starting to get to a place where we want to be. Okay, so let's start to look at contrast and colour now. In the last video, I was using a module called Velvia to affect some of the colour in my image, and again, that's another one that's not really recommended by the Darktable manual. So the note for that one says this module causes hue and brightness shifts that can be difficult to manage. Instead, use the colour balance RGB module for colour modifications. So we can find that one if we come into perhaps colour, and then we've got colour balance RGB up here. So the top one, the master sliders, basically we can change the hue of the image, which we don't want to do. We can bump up the vibrance, so that works a bit like the vibrance slider in Lightroom. Just gives it a little bit more colour and the good old pop that we like to add to our images. Again, contrast, we can play around with that one, but I'm actually going to alter contrast differently as I go throughout the image, so I'm not going to touch that one here. And then we've got linear chroma grading, perceptual saturation grading, and perceptual brilliance grading. So I think linear chroma grading, that's saturation basically. So we can bump up the saturation or reduce it, and that won't affect the brightness of the image. Perceptual saturation will alter the brightness, so not only will it make it more saturated, but it'll kind of make it darker as well, or it'll make it lighter as we come down to the desaturated end. It's kind of like mixing paint. It's like mixing white into your paint or black to create a darker or lighter effect. And we've got perceptual brilliance at the bottom, which more or less is brightness. And for each one of those, we can affect the shadows, midtones, or highlights. So in this image, I think what I want to do is maybe bump up the brightness a bit. So we can bump up the brightness in the shadows, and maybe the midtones a bit. I think highlights are probably alright. Going to leave the highlights where they are. And let's have a look with the, I think the saturation's alright really, we don't need to, we could maybe just bump up a tiny bit in the shadows. But I'm not really going to play around too much with that. Now from here, in Lightroom, I would start to add clarity and texture and sharpening. And we can do that in Darktable by finding the contrast equalizer. And let's have a look, where's that one? We might need to do a search for this one. So we can search for modules up here. So we've got contrast equalizer here. So here we've got a line that runs through the middle of this little readout, and we can bring these little nodes up or down. So you see what that's doing when I do that. It's basically boosting contrast, so local contrast basically. Now we don't want to do too much, it starts to look crazy if we do that. So this end down here is going to be the shadows, the darker areas, the coarse contrast, and up here you can see it says fine. So this is going to affect the finer detail, and this down here is going to affect the coarser, darker, thicker, more bulky areas of the image. So I'm going to go somewhere in the middle, just make a little bit of a hump, and you see it's really sensitive, so we don't want to do too much. And if we use the scroll on the mouse, the scroll wheel, we can make the area that we're affecting larger or smaller. You see that circle will grow. So if we can make it bigger, we can bring up more of these at the same time. We can make it huge and do them all like that. Or we can bring it down, make it small and just affect individual ones like this. So you just need to play around with this a little bit until it creates the effect that you want. If we just turn that off, you can see that was before and that's afterwards. Maybe just a little touch more. Like I said, you don't want to overdo it because it just tends to look really unrealistic and we don't want that. So I think that's alright, and what I'm going to do is create another one of these. So this one here is going to be the equivalent of clarity in Lightroom. So if I press Control on my keyboard and click that module header there, I can type something in there, put clarity, and then just over here to the right of where I've just named that, we've got a little icon, and I can click that and create a new instance. So we've got another contrast equalizer now, and again I can control click that, and if I put texture in here, this one I'm going to set to affect more of the fine detail end. So you see all the water droplets are starting to get a little bit of a lift now. Again, let's not go too far, so just a slight boost down here on this right hand side. So we can add some sharpen, and we'll just bring up the radius and amount. So the amount is how much it is sharpening, and the radius is like the size of the area that it's affecting. So let's have a look. We can bring that up a little bit more, I think. It is quite nice having all of that sharpening on the water droplets. It really does give it a real nice dynamic feel. So I think that's okay. So let's come back to the Active Modules tab and let's see what we've got now. So the one we haven't talked about is sigmoid, and this is the equivalent, or it's the same type of module as Filmic RGB, which I used in the last video. And I was really using that incorrectly, or at least definitely not in the preferred way in the last video. So in my naivety, I was using Filmic RGB kind of like an effect and applying it as if it was just going to make the image look more film-like or something like that. But Filmic RGB and sigmoid are much more fundamental than that. What they actually do is they remap the tonal range of the image and kind of expand or contract the dynamic range so that it fits better to the dynamic range of your display, so your monitor or whatever you're looking at the image on. So if we open that up, we can play around with the contrast here, and you see that really does have quite a powerful effect to the image. Bring it right to the left, it's quite washed out there, but we can really bring that up and get those blacks to where we want them. You can also play around with the skew. You see there, that's shifting the compression more towards the shadows or highlights. So it's really about getting those just to where the image looks right to your eye. So I'm going to bring it to about, I don't want it too heavy in the blacks, so maybe about there. And I'm not going to play around with these other settings for now, that's maybe for another video. But we're more or less where we want to be with the image now, we're more or less done. But there are a couple of tweaks I want to make to this, and one of those is just to make the top of the image a little less dark compared to the bottom, because it's quite top heavy at the moment. You've obviously got that dark background with the trees there at the top, and it's quite bright and white at the bottom with the water. So what I can do here is just create another exposure module, so new instance, and I'll bump the exposure up, and I'm just looking at the dark area at the top for this. I'm not really worried about the bright area at the bottom, which is getting overexposed, because what I'm going to do now is come down here to the bottom, and this is another thing I wasn't really doing in the last video. I wasn't using masks. So the difference between Lightroom and Darktable in this regard is that instead of having an area or a set palette of selective tools like you do in Lightroom, basically each module in Darktable has its own masking tools, or most of them do anyway. So you'll see down here we've got off, uniformly, drawn mask, parametric masks, drawn and parametric, raster, and I'm not going to go into the parametric ones. I think that's probably for another video. They're really powerful, but I'm just going to be using a drawn mask for now. And we can select different masks down here like radial and circular, ellipse, you know, things like that, or a brush, but I'm going to select the gradient one for now. This works a little bit differently to Lightroom. We just click where we want this to have the kind of like blend area, so where it's going to start going from applied to not applied. So I've clicked it there. We can just turn on the little icon here, so the yellow area here will show what's being affected in the image and what's being masked. And now we can change the parameters of our gradient. So I just need to come down a little bit, and we've got some settings down here. We've got the contrast, and you see that will be the difference between the top area and the bottom area. Mask opacity, where we've got the kind of fall off at the bottom and how opaque that is. And we can just play around with the blurring radius and feathering radius, which is basically the gradient, to get the effect that we want. So I just want to apply the effect to the top half of the image like that. Okay, so I can just turn off that one there. So now, if I just come back up here, if we turn that off, you see it's just brightening the top of the image there. Alright, so the next thing I want to tweak is the shadows on the rider, basically. Mainly around his visor, just down here at the bottom of the jet ski as well, just the dark black areas. I want those to be a little bit more, I want some more detail in the shadows basically. So I'm going to duplicate the tone equalizer module, or create a new instance of it rather, and I'm just going to apply a mask to that first. So I'm going to use a draw mask again, and this time I'm going to use a ellipse. So I'll click that in there. I can just drag this out. If I press Control on my keyboard, I can rotate that. Let's have a look at the mask itself. If we press Shift on the keyboard and use the scroll wheel, we can alter the amount of feathering around the edge. So let's just put that over the rider, like so. Maybe I'll bring down the feathering and just make that, I'll bring up the feathering, make it more feathered, and kind of bring it in a little bit, just so it's not really affecting too much of the background. Okay, so now I can change the parameters, and it's just going to affect this area here where our rider is. So I want to, I'm using the advanced settings here in tone equalizer now. So basically the left hand side of this is going to be the darker areas, the shadows, and towards the right it's going to be the highlights. But you see there's not much data here. This is the kind of like the histogram data here. So we want to be raising our nodes or little points up where we've got information in this histogram. So you see now where I raise these up, we start to get some brightness and detail back in those shadow areas. And we don't want to overdo it, but I think that's looking much better now. And finally then, just going to close that one up, I'm going to add a vignette to this, so I might have to search for this one again. A vignette in there, so let's turn that on. And this works a little bit differently to Lightroom. We can just change the width to height ratio here so it fits better to the image, the landscape format of the image. And we've got fall off start and fall off radius, so that's just going to control where the darker areas fall in the image and how close they are to the edge, etc. I'm going to bring the brightness right down just so I can see what I'm doing. I'm just going to get these fall off start and fall off radius settings right. Something like that maybe. Then I can bring the brightness back just so it's not too heavy. And we can just compare that to the original image. If we come into the history, if we go back to original, compared to the final image, see there's quite a big difference there. We can create a snapshot of that and do a side-by-side comparison. So that was before and afterwards. So as you can see, Darktable is a very comprehensive piece of software, and although the learning curve is much steeper than say something like Lightroom, it does contain many more features. And if you're doing the type of work that relies on accuracy and colour theory and colour science and things like that, and you need something very technically accurate, I think Darktable is going to be much more useful to you than something say like Lightroom. But remember, I've been talking about what I got wrong last time and how I've done it in a more intended way this time and what I've learnt about that. But it is important not to forget that, at the end of the day, you're trying to create something that looks good. So if you're doing, more artistic styles of photography or landscape where it doesn't need to be that accurate or things like that, sometimes it's good to just forget all the rules and just get creative. But it is good to know the rules so that you can break them. So I do recommend getting to grips with Darktable, learning the different parameters and modules and how they all work. I've still got a lot to learn. I know I've learned a lot since last time, but I'm sure people will point out things that I've got wrong in this video, and yeah, I'm just going to use it a bit more and hopefully get better with it. But it is a fantastic piece of software, considering it's free as well. So it is worth taking the time to get to grips with it. So that's about it for this video. There are just a few more shots to show you. I'll put those up on screen now. But that's it for this video. Massive thank you for watching. If you're a regular and you tune in for all the videos, I can't thank you enough. As I always say, massive thank you to you. But if you are new to the channel and you want to subscribe, you know how to do that. Just click down there on the big red button, or over here on this little picture of me. And that way you can stay up to date with what I'm doing. There are usually new videos Sunday mornings at 10 AM UK time. So I hope you can join me for the next one. But until then, thanks a lot everyone, and bye for now.